Economic calculations are not as simple as ABC. Today, the global economy is at a critical stage due to the Russia-Ukraine war and quite possibly the after effects of the COVID-19 pandemic. Large food-producing countries that are affected will cause a domino effect to consumer countries. As such, our country is now facing global economic challenges that have caused an increase in the price of goods. The increase in the price of goods, especially perishables recently, has a direct impact on consumers, causing them to ask the government to come up with a solution to control this price increase. NST's survey in several supermarkets and grocery stores found that there was a relatively high increase in the price of perishables. Some of the consumers there hoped that the increase in the price of the goods would only be temporary and that the government would continue to monitor the issue. Today, Malaysians may be faced with a perception war against the rising prices of goods that are happening in our country. However, we need to first understand that the amount of subsidies given by the government to the people has reached 74 billion ringgit, which is a relatively large amount to help guarantee a more relevant cost of living for the people. Full coverage on NST Insight.
Hello there, you are tuning in to the latest edition of NST Insight. Now today's topic is high food prices. Why is it happening and what can we do about it? Now, at the moment, the inflation rate in Malaysia is the lowest in Southeast Asia, and this is a result of the government's continuous efforts to deal with it by continuing to provide subsidies amounting to 77 billion ringgit. And our Prime Minister, Datuk Seri Ismail Sabri Yaakob, has said that the government is always listening to complaints from Keluarga Malaysia about the rise in the prices of goods, especially food. Now, to talk about this today on NST Insight, we are joined by our panelists. First up, joining us in the studio is Dr. Ahmed Razman bin Abdul Latif, Associate Professor at the Putra Business School. Hi, Doctor. Thank you so much for joining us in the studio today.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Thank you. And we are also joined virtually by another guest, the President of the Consumers Association of Penang, Mr. Mohideen Abdul Kader. Hi, Mr. Mohideen. Thank you so much for making time for the show.
How are you?
I'm good, thank you. How are you?
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you loud and clear. Thank you so much, Mr. Mohideen. We'll be with you in a moment, but let's start first with Dr. Ahmed Razman. Now, before we begin with the whole topic of the high food prices, perhaps we should start by explaining some key economic terms for the consumers, perhaps such as consumer price index, food inflation. What exactly do these mean, and how does it actually relate to the prices of goods in a way that the general public can actually understand?
Yes, Azaria, if we try to explain to the public that the CPI or Consumer Price Index is 3.4% in June, majority of us probably couldn't figure out or imagine what does 3.4% means.
Yeah.
And CPI is actually equal to inflation rate. And if we look further, there's also a breakdown of products and services that experience increase or decrease in terms of pricing. That's why we also mentioned about inflation, food inflation rate in June about 6.1%, but the total inflation rate is about 3.4%. So what does it mean actually?
Yeah.
So actually representing basket of products and services. So there's a base year index. At the moment, the base year is actually at 2010. So when you say it's 3.4%, it's increased from June this year corresponding to the June last year. But it's always we referred to the base year. So when we look into the base year of 2010 to now, the inflation rate actually has gone up by 127.4%. So meaning that, in a layman term, for this basket of product services, I think now probably it's around 500 plus products and services that normally consumed by the people in Malaysia. So it's 127.4 means in 2010, to buy all this, okay, let's say we can spend 100 ringgit to buy all these product and services, but now it's going to cost us 127.4. So it means the price of product and services has gone up.
I see.
But 3.4 mean from 1 year to another, meaning from last year to this year. But from 2010, it has increased by 27.4%. But when you look into the food, it's actually even higher. The index now probably about more than 140 points, meaning that in 2010, 12 years ago, if you can buy this group of, or basket of food and beverages at 100 ringgit, now it's going to cost us 140 ringgit. But when we look into the public, they are not referring to the whole basket of product services. They will just simply highlighting things that really matter to them, like the price of chicken, maybe fish, maybe cooking oil. So that's why sometimes when we explain the inflation rate is 3.4, but they said, but I noticed that the chicken increased by 50%, the cooking oil by maybe 20%. So what does it mean? So it means that 3.4 actually refer to the basket of I think right now it's 500 different kind of product and services. So that's actually how to explain in the general term.
I see. So do you think the consumers these days actually understand this concept about how this actually ties in with food inflation?
So basically what the consumer understand, that the price keep increasing year by year, keep going up. Like I mentioned, the index now is actually quite high, 127, and food 100. So that's actually something that people realize, that we probably have yet to experience a decline in prices generally, especially when talking about food. But now the situation now becoming more critical because they don't mind if the price gone up if they can afford it. Meaning if the salary, the income also increase in line with this food increase, food price increase. But in 2020, the salary, the average salary actually reduced by 9%. And if you look at the median, it's actually 15.6%. So this actually somehow exacerbate the situation, meaning now it's very costly to buy things, and I do not have enough cash or money to buy this because my income has been reduced. Some lost their job, some their salary has been reduced. So this is the situation. The double whammy there, the increase of prices and also the reduce of income.
I see. So it's actually a very complex situation where you have your salary increasing by only so much, and then the food price is increasing much more than that. I guess that's what you're saying, Doctor. Now, if I could we move on to Encik Mohideen, who's waiting on the line. Now, Mr. Mohideen, I need to ask to you about consumers. Now, we always hear about consumers complaining on social media platforms, airing their grouses there, so to speak, about the rising prices of goods, especially items such as chicken. Now, is there truth to allegations that have been going on, especially on social media, that there exist cartels that are actually responsible for the increase in the prices of goods, and they're taking advantage of this whole situation? Is there any truth to it?
Thank you very much, and for inviting me to participate in this talk show.
It's our pleasure.
I think rising prices is a very hot issue in the community, and it is also carried in the media almost every day. It affects millions of people because rising prices, but lower incomes. What is happening is many people have lost their jobs, or they are receiving less monthly income as a result of lowering, as a result of factories and all that cutting down on production. So, if you go to any event that is a popular topic is about rising prices. But the rising prices is a reality. If you talk about cooking oil, it went up as high as 43 ringgit recently and has come down to 34. It was originally about 28 ringgit. So it's quite a substantial margin. And with incomes down and the cost of products, especially food, going up, it is creating a great hardship for the people. But the causes of these rising prices are multiple, and it is not going to go off very soon. And we have to seriously, the government especially, has seriously to take initiative to understand the problem comprehensively and institute policies that will not bring hardship to our people. If you talk about rising prices, of course, there has been allegations of profiteering. Prices have gone up as a result of profiteering. And as far as the chicken prices are concerned, the Malaysian Competition Commission, MYCC, actually carried out an investigation and found a few companies actually cooperating among themselves to raise the price of chicken feed. And chicken feed constitutes almost 70% of the cost of chicken. So as a result of this so-called collusion between companies, consumers will have to pay higher price. But MYCC only acted after non-governmental organizations like CAP and were raising this issue, as well as some newspapers carried out some detailed articles how there's a monopoly in the supply of chicks to the farms, in the supply of feed to the chicken farms, as well as the marketing of the chicken. And MYC should have acted even before it comes out. It has to do proactive action.
Preventive
It cannot
measures.
wait for complaints for people until it starts investigating. But the MICC report is now have been presented to the Commission, and the Commission has asked these companies to explain their conduct. So we are waiting for the results of this investigation. That is a very positive move. And also the other aspect of the other factors that contributes to increasing prices is rather structural. For example, we import a lot of food from overseas, including chicken feed. All the chicken feed comes from overseas. And if there is a shortage in the exporting country, the prices go up, and we have to bear the burden of the thing. That is why I will deal with it later, the issue of food security.
Okay.
And one more thing I would like to mention, two more things. One is the currency. Our currency has been deteriorating compared to other currencies. So when we import a lot of food, almost more than 30% of the food, almost 60 to 70% of meat, mutton and beef, we are importing. So if our currency goes down, we are paying more. And this is passed on to the consumers. So that is another area the government has to seriously address, how to strengthen our currency. And finally, the question of waste. People are wasting a lot of food. According to one of the government agencies, we are more than 4,000 tons of food is wasted every year, and it's enough to feed more than 1 million people 3 meals. So here again we have to the authorities as well as the civil society organizations, we have been doing it. CAP has been doing it, campaigns every year, particularly in Ramadan, to calling on people not to waste. So a major campaign must be carried out, because the more you waste, it also reflects on the price of the food materials you buy.
Indeed.
So these I feel are some of the causes that need serious attention on the part of society and on the part of the government and on the part of the business
I
community.
see. Okay. Thank you, Mr. Mohideen. Now, we'll be back with you in a moment, but now moving on again to Dr. Ahmed Razman. Now, you heard what Mr. Mohideen said about the current situation in Malaysia, especially pertaining to MyCC. Now, before we move on to the next question, perhaps you have any thoughts you'd like to share on what Mr. Mohideen said just now. Do you agree with the situation?
Yes, if we look into the current situation, of course, for example, chicken, we actually already reached the self-sustaining level, meaning we are producing more than we need.
Yeah.
Hence, we are currently exporting this chicken to Singapore, for example. But some of the challenges that we face is that even though we produce lots of chicken, but we're still depending almost 100% on the chicken feed. And because of that, we are affected by the situation out there, the global impact, especially when there's weather changes, if there is a Russia-Ukraine crisis, and so many things that disrupt the global supply chain.
And out of our control also.
Yes, because this rising in food prices is not caused by just one factor. Otherwise, we already able to handle it.
The solution, yeah.
So it's a multiple of factors, internal and externally.
I see. Okay, so in Malaysia, there's this assumption, I think, if you can, that the decision to raise prices seems to be controlled by a handful of middlemen and traders, while the government seems to be giving leeway to this. Now, do you think this assumption is true? And if so, why is this happening and how can we control it?
Well, we're practicing open capital market, meaning that the retailer, the businesses, they can simply set their selling prices, but must depend on the demand. If they simply set it as high prices, consumer won't simply buy it or just buying from the competitors. So that's why the government didn't really intervene in it. But of course, we do have a Rules and Regulation Act. We have a Price Control and Anti-Profiteering Act, meaning that if there is a particular retailer or businesses that simply raise exorbitant price, then the consumer can simply file loss report. We do have consumer tribunal, and this actually can be a very effective system to ensure that there is no excessive profit taking if the public do take advantage of this platform, these facilities, because we cannot simply just complain and do nothing about it, but we already have everything in place, all the channel, the platform, and the access to it. But the problem that we can face when there's a small group of businesses, I mean, when we're talking about chicken producer, I think we can say there are probably less than 20 of the main producer. And what if this oligopolistic kind of nature, these companies collude together and increase all the prices at the same time? So then we have a problem, because then the consumer will not be able to say, look, this one is higher. Turn out everyone is same price, but at the higher level.
Yeah.
So in this case, then this is where the government intervention come in, where we have seen the 77 billion has been spent on ensuring that a certain important products and services have been kept to the minimum. At the moment, the subsidy is to all. But of course, we know the next question is how long the government can continue to subsidize this.
Yes.
But this is the kind of intervention we're talking about, from the federal government through the subsidy, and also on the monetary aspect of it, the decision by the central bank whether to reduce or increase the OPR rate.
Yeah. Speaking of the OPR, the overnight policy rate, with the increase in food prices and also the overnight policy rate, this has an effect on interest rates. But what does it mean to us, the everyday consumers?
Okay, theoretically, an increase of OPR or the interest rate will reduce the level of activities, economic activities, so people will tend to borrow less and spend less and wanted to save more. But our current OPR actually is quite low, 2.25, still below than what the rate imposed before the pandemic. Before pandemic is 3.25, meaning the cost of financing still small. So due to that, I noticed that actually the impact on the inflation is more coming from the federal government intervention through the subsidies. But when we're talking about the cost of financing, of course, we are still not out of this economic uncertainties. So probably for the B40 groups, they might find out that this is actually going to be additional cost for them, especially if they borrowing for houses or long-term personal loan, because these are the kind of loan that are going to be affected when the OPR increase.
Okay, now Dr. Razman, just now we spoke about salaries and increasing. Before I move on to Mr. Mohideen again, just one more short question. How much do you think somebody should make in today's day and age so that they can actually cope with the rising prices of foods?
Well, if you refer to the statistic from the Department of Statistics Malaysia, the average expenditure per household differs significantly across states. For example, in KL, you probably need around 6,000 plus to manage your expenditure.
6,000 plus, okay.
Yes, and Selangor about 5,000. So 6,000, I'm referring to you. so you better cut back on your Starbucks coffee.
Well, I better get a second job then.
Okay, but so if talking about the minimum wage, 1,500. So imagine even when you have two-person working, husband and wife, earning minimum wage of 1,500 each. So that's 3,000, and you are in the KL, so that's probably quite difficult to maintain a balanced annual or monthly expenditure.
Yeah, that's only half of what you need, and you still have to spend on other things.
Yes, so because of that, when we're talking about how these food prices are going to impact the B40, actually M40 also will face the similar harsh situation, especially they are living in urban. And when we're talking about inflation rate, also if we go deeper, the inflation rate in Selangor actually higher than national average, meaning the actual food prices in Selangor is actually higher than national average. So this is the situation here, meaning there are lots of things that the government need to think of. It's not just simply controlling the inflation rate, but also how the population, the B40, M40 can have a higher disposable income. What worries me most now is that we probably do not have enough disposable income. We probably in deficit every month due to the rising prices and lower salary.
Yeah, so we have to look at it holistically.
Yes.
All right, Dr. Ahmed, thank you so much for that. Now, back to you, Mr. Mohideen. Now, we want to talk about consumers. There is this thing that some people say that the prices of goods should actually be determined by the market forces, which are the sellers and the consumers. But in Malaysia, it seems that the consumers' voices and actions are somehow not heard. Do you agree with this? What do you think the situation is like in Malaysia? And what about the consumer's voice? Is consumer activism active here, or has it somewhat failed?
The consumers' voice, they are making the voice, they're making the calls, they are making the demands. But it depends on the response from the authorities to the demands that consumer movement makes to bring about changes. But I will not agree that the consumer movement has failed to influence the policies and laws to protect consumers. For example, the consumer movement is largely responsible, particularly CAP, for introducing the Consumer Protection Act initially people were cheated, they were given substandard goods, they were given goods of poor quality and overcharged. But because of the efforts of the consumer movement, the law was brought into being, Consumer Protection Act, and today it's a very inexpensive legal procedure to complain about exorbitant charges and poor quality of goods. So to say that consumer movement has failed is not quite right. Moreover, even in the issue of prices, it is the consumer movement who has been in the forefront articulating what is happening on the ground before even the authorities realize what is happening. And as a result, the authorities have moved. As I gave you the example of my CC in causing investigation into the cartels manipulating. This is one of the results of what consumer movements have been pressing for. So I don't think, I think the consumer movement, we are also working closely with government departments to help government departments to identify policies that are not beneficial to the people. We are helping them to identify where there are abuses. And so this two-way process is helping to things make better for the ordinary man industry.
I see. Now, if we look at other countries, especially countries in the West, price boycotts against price hikes have had somewhat of an impact in those countries. Do you think a similar move would work here in Malaysia? And if not, what other alternative ways do you think consumers can take to actually have their voices to be better heard than currently?
You are talking about boycotts, is it?
Yes, boycotts against price hikes, having their voices heard, perhaps having gatherings to have their voices heard and to prove their point, so to speak. So in the West, this has been done a lot. So do you think?
We are.
Yeah. Do you think a move like that would?
Activities, consumer, our organization has many activities to communicate to the people government policies, to communicate to the people about issues and mobilize them to make demands to improve the situation. For example, we conduct education programs to educate the people, particularly the lower income group who are not familiar with how to manage their money, to so that proper they do not waste their money in useless purchasing useless things, and focus and learning to budget. Most people do not know how to budget their money. They earn $500, they spend $550, and as a result, get into problem. So we are having education courses throughout the year. Secondly, we are also having courses to teaching people how to produce food in where they live. For example, you can grow a lot of vegetable like terong, bendi, and others, even you live in flats. So the Consumer Association has conducting courses in our premises and also in schools and in public places, and teaching people how to grow their own vegetables, how to make their own fertilizer, how to use natural method to control pests. So it is not true that the consumer movement is not doing anything.
So it's a different type of consumer activism, that's what you're saying. Okay, Mr. Mohideen, now given that the rising prices have had such a huge impact on consumers, do you think that the government perhaps should do more? Do you think that the government should delay mega projects perhaps and maybe divert those funds towards helping consumers who are most in need? What do you think?
I think unless the mega project is of absolute necessity for security or something, it can go on. But otherwise, many of the mega projects that really don't benefit the majority of the public should be scrapped. For example, I'll give you an example. There is a project in Penang to reclaim 3 islands in the south of the island. And that is a very rich fishery area. And hundreds of families depend for their livelihood on fishing. And it also supplies fish to the community. So here is a project which makes no sense. If you need more land for the island, there is a lot of land across the bridge in the mainland. So you are sacrificing food security. We are talking about food security every day. Our ministers are talking about it. We go to international conferences and make commitment to improve food security and the environment. And yet, we are embarking on this most destructive project. It doesn't make sense. And secondly, another example, in Perak, there are about 11 areas where farmers were growing vegetables and fruits for the market, for the people. Their activities began not now or 10 years or 20 years ago. It was before the war in the 30s. And the land it is state land. And they've been cultivating. And instead of giving them secure tenure, in fact, some of them were offered leases earlier on, or TOL. But later, the state government changed its mind and wanted to evict them and give the land to some developers. What are you talking about? Food security. And then at the same time, you're destroying the source of food security. This is the contradiction in the policies that must be rectified. Because the federal government and state government sovereignty over land matters. The federal government doesn't have. So there has to be the land council should discuss the food security matter and ensure that every piece of land that is producing food should not be touched. It should be secured. Otherwise, don't talk about food security. We are not going to have food security.
I see. Indeed, some very interesting points there from Mr. Mohideen. Now, Dr. Ahmed Razman, if I may move to you, perhaps the same question. Do you think that the government should delay some mega projects, or are the subsidies that are provided right now enough to maintain the consumers?
Okay, that's the main issue that we need to look at, especially in a few months' time. We're going to have the 2023 budget.
Yeah.
The federal government did announce recently that they're going to reduce the expenditure, the operating expenditures, as well as not to proceed with some of the development expenditures for this year. But we do not have the details. I mean, how much they have spent, and how much they're going to stop in terms of the impending projects. So perhaps the more important issues that need to look at how we're going to sustain the subsidy itself. I don't think stopping certain major projects or reducing the operating expenditures will allow us to continue with the subsidy to the extent of the amount of 70 or 80 billion annually, because last time the government only budgeted or targeted around 30 billion. And another thing that we need to highlight here is that the annual debt commitment by the government has increased by 50% for the past 5 years, meaning this year alone we have to pay 43 billion for the interest payment and the debt. That's equivalent to 18% of the total annual government revenue. So now, so it's not just simply reducing expenditures, because we still need some of these development expenditures for the long-term prospect of the country, but how are we going to get additional revenue? Or what are the expenses that we can reduce? So probably the approach is probably two-pronged, meaning how we can increase the revenue and how we can reduce some other expenditures. For example, Transparency International estimated that between 4 to 6% of government income lost due to corruption. So that's equivalent to about 40-50 billion annually. So if we can tackle on the corruption, we don't probably need to reduce other expenditures. 40 to 50 billion. Remember, back in 2017, the collection from GST is around 42 billion, because people keep asking or wondering, are we going to have GST back? So imagine collecting 45 billion from GST, but turn out all lost due to the corruption. So that's how we can reduce certain wastage or corruption. But when talking about increasing the revenue, when we look into the Western countries, we always compare to them how they will be they're able to provide social benefit or coverage, assistance. And the reason they're able to do that, because if you look into the tax rate, it's about 50% of the personal income tax, and the corporation tax rate also quite high compared to in our country. Out of 15 million workers, probably 1.5 million actually paid income tax, and our corporate tax also among the lowest. So we cannot have both, meaning very low tax rate and very small taxpayers, and at the same time having huge subsidies. So we still need to figure out how to increase the revenue. So I'm probably thinking something like capital gain tax, where we impose an additional tax on those who are making profits through the capital market, especially on the equity stock exchange. So again, when we look into how we're going to handle this, we must look comprehensively on the revenue aspect of it, and also the expenditures, as well as tackling the corruption in the country.
I see, certainly. Now, when it comes to the price of chicken, one of the most important things that we've been speaking about for the past few months, the government has said that we cannot increase the price of chicken further, because first of all, it's an important source of protein, and we have to make it to be continually accessible for the B40 group especially. Do you think this move is the right move, and will it be sustainable for our economy?
Okay, so what the government can do, probably like what they are doing right now, to continue on the price control. But what's the point of controlling the price if the people still cannot afford it? Meaning that we heard recently the bantuan keluarga Malaysia, but it's one-off. I mean, when a family receive 100 ringgit, I'm pretty sure they will be able to finish it in one trip. But what about the subsequent months? Okay, so and when we're talking about even the cooking oil subsidy, the packet one, I've been to every supermarket, I couldn't find it. I should go to Thailand maybe. So so what I'm trying to say here, so controlling the price is one thing, but we need to ensure that these groups, B40, the affected group, will be able to get financial or cash assistance, but probably not the current method when you give cash, because you don't know how they're going to spend it. Probably in form of a e-voucher, meaning if they spend it through e-voucher, we can trace the expenditure, and we actually can even avoid the smuggling of cooking oil. For example, if they purchase the cooking oil from a particular shop, then the record is there. So if the shop actually purchased 1,000 packet, but the record says they only sell 400, so they should have another 600 there. But if it's not there, meaning that they already smuggle it out.
Okay.
So probably using the technology, we used to have My Sejahtera where everyone have one.
Yeah.
So why not just impose that into the existing app so that there's no cash physically transfer hand, but rather this one. And it's actually can save government money.
Yeah.
Because when the government need to give cash to the affected group, they have to borrow and then give the cash. And then probably after they collect the tax, pay back the borrowing with additional interest.
Yeah.
But if you do this electronic voucher, so the retailer, the businesses, they will receive just a code or a statement saying the government now owe them certain amount of money. So then when they are about to pay their corporate tax, then they can do contra, meaning instead of paying, for example, 10 million of tax, because they already collected 2 million of these vouchers, so they only have to pay 8 million. So this way, the government no need to borrow money in the first place, and it will encourage the retailer, the businesses to file their tax claim, because they need to get that rebate, that contra. Because for the past 2 years, we noticed that the tax compliance rate has gone down, meaning the individual, the businesses, they fail to file tax claim. So this actually not just killing two birds with one stone. I'm probably thinking multiple birds here.
Yeah, that's an interesting approach, Doctor. Perhaps we should look at that further in the future in terms of addressing this issue further. But can I mention about price controls for a moment? Now, regarding price controls, people have said that it's not reasonable to have it just be determined by supply and demand. Do you think there are other mechanisms that we can actually put in place regarding price control of controlled items such as chicken?
Actually, it's a short-term measures. Okay, this is not the way, because this is going to hurt the business even more. And so that's why we have this Dasar Agro Makanan 2.0. I think launched last year. There are more than I think around 73 action plans actually meant to increase our food security. We are still net importer of food, so we need to make sure that we don't have to depend too much on the imported food. And I think that's the thing. Some of these measures actually short-term and popular in nature, so it can be a populist move, but it's not necessarily going to be effective in the long run. So we need a commitment, especially from the government, to actually execute things that they're supposed to execute in all this initiative, in all this policy, because we are good at launching things, but to maintain, to actually realize it is another challenge. So that's why, but I can understand what we have experienced for the past 2-3 years. We have experienced so many kind of instability in terms of economically, socially, health and wise, and also politically. So, but I believe that one of these factors actually very important that we need now. The political stability is very important.
More commitment, you said, from the government. Perhaps the subsidies and the cash aid, is it enough, or should there be more concrete measures from the government?
We still need all these short-term measures, the cash handout, the price control, the subsidies. But we also want to see what's next, because of course it will make people happy temporarily or for the next few months. But that's probably need to be, we need to also have some mid-term and long-term approaches, so that we don't simply pass these burdens to the next one that's going to lead the country, because we are going to have a general election soon. So we don't want when the government keep changing and the initiative or something that works before has been replaced by something else. So the stability for me is actually still important at the moment.
I see. Okay, some very interesting points there, Doctor. Now, Mr. Mohideen, when we talk about price hikes and price increases and also food inflation, it's a very sensitive issue, we have to admit that. But is there any way that an NGO can actually work together with the government to deal with this problem, so to speak? Is there any way that you can collaborate with the government?
We have been collaborating with the government in terms of educating people how to manage the money, educating the people on how to grow their own food, and various types of education. But I like to go to another subject really. This is the role of the government. You know, we neglect our smallhold farmers. The smallhold farmers contribute the majority in this country. Our agriculture policy need to be relooked at. We have been focusing on producing for the global market, you know, oil palm, rubber and all things. We have neglected food agriculture, and food agriculture is mainly small scale. So here is where the government should have a clear policy, not just thinking bringing big corporations to produce food, but how do we make our small farmers more productive, and how do we ensure that whatever they produce is effectively marketed, and so that they find an income from their products. What is happening is many are producing, there is no effective marketing, and as a result, they are discouraged, continue with the farming. And secondly, our small whole farmers are an aging population. You know, the children all go to the town. This is where our education also has failed. We have agricultural colleges. Why can't people who have been trained in agriculture, who have been trained in animal husbandry, go to the rural area, like what is happening in Korea and other places, and make our land more productive and produce new type of products and high value products, so that the income of the farmer will go up. Here is where the government has to take a proactive approach to provide marketing, credit, you know, at a very low interest rate, and make it attractive for young people to participate in farming. In that way, I believe that is the only way we can achieve food security in this country. Let's not, we cannot we cannot drink too much palm oil. We can use it for cooking. So, but we cannot do with rice, without meat, without vegetables, without spices. Here is where the focus should be in our agricultural policy.
I see. Now, Mr. Mohideen, we have only a few minutes left in the conversation, but before we end, could we have a summary of what you think is the expectations of both the consumers as well as the retailers? What do you think they're hoping for most from the current situation and from the government? And is there possibly a way which we can reach perhaps middle ground to satisfy all parties?
I think the government should take proactive steps to prevent profiteering and bring down the prices. Surely giving subsidy is not going to solve the problem, because subsidy is across the board and it is going to everybody, rich and the poor. So we need a different system of financial assistance to the B40 and the lower M40. And the government should also, there is a lot of idle land, you know, they should be encourage young people to go into agriculture and make this idle land productive. Yeah. And secondly, there's also need to be consumers, you know, as I mentioned earlier on, there is a lot of waste by consumers. We have to carry out a strong campaign and also have other mechanisms, legal and other mechanisms, to stop this waste and to ensure that no valuable food goes into the rubbish bin.
Indeed, I see. All right. Thank you, Mr. Mohideen. Now, Dr. Ahmed, Razman, perhaps the same question. How do you think we can reach middle ground between the retailers and the consumers, as well as the government, and actually have a way to have all parties be satisfied with the current situation?
Well, Albert Einstein used to say that doing the same thing again and again, expecting different results, is called insanity.
Yeah.
So all these measures that the government is taking actually doesn't really address the problem in the long run.
The core
because,
issue, yeah.
like I mentioned, starting since 2010 until now, the inflation has gone up by 27.4%, and the food price increased by 40%. So, but we are still doing the same measures. So we need young brights, young mind to explore and give suggestions to the government how to do things differently, how we can address this through probably the technology, digitalization. If you notice, the way we communicate through smartphone, the digitalization of every aspect of our life has gone tremendously for the past few years. But in terms of economic measures, how we address this situation is still, increase OPR, subsidy, giving people money,
cash vouchers.
I'm sure there are many other measures that can effectively address this.
Yeah.
And this is something that I hope the government will be brave enough to not looking into a short-term gain, but making sure that the nation, the people will remain prosperous for the next decades or millennia.
Yeah, one more thing mentioning about cash vouchers and subsidies. If we keep giving out vouchers and cash subsidies to the B40 group, we also have the lower M40 who are slipping into the B40 group. Do you think there will ever be an end to the government just giving out cash vouchers if this keeps on happening?
Yes, since we are not growing money from the tree, like I said, there is a need to look into mechanism, because money is just a medium of exchange to allow transaction of product services in a community. So it's just one of the medium of exchanges. So probably we can look into many opportunity or mechanism that will allow the activities of economy to prosper, that allow people to have good food on the table, but not necessarily using the cash that we always depend on right now.
Very well. And on that note, we have come to the end of today's NST Insight. Thank you so much, Dr. Razman, for spending time with us today.
You're welcome.
Thank you. And thank you as well, Mr. Mohideen, for joining us all the way from Pulau Pinang. We appreciate your time spending with us on NST Insight today.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you for your time. It's our pleasure. And to you, thank you so much for tuning in to today's episode of NST Insight. And do tune in again, where we speak about more topics that will pique your interest and have an effect on all our viewers. We hope you've enjoyed today's episode. We'll see you on the next episode of NST Insight. I'm Azaria Tagaya signing off. See you next time.